So welcome to Edgy Conversations today. We're speaking with Michael, talking about his initiative that's based in the Parkdale area and that neighborhood called Making Space, and the whole premise behind that and where it's headed. We're going to hear today. Michael, welcome.
Hi, Carla. So the the project itself has been called Sharing the Sacred, and that came out of our experience with myself running an arts company for 10 years. It was called Making Room Community Arts. And Making Room Community Arts, we had celebrations and events bringing the community together in all sorts of exciting ways. We brought a giant raft to Lake Ontario once, and it's been really wonderful. But what we really found through that experience is that we had stumbled on a way of bringing people together across difference. And what we really learned is that that's really what people wanted. There's a whole number of Toronto's really blessed with a number of community arts companies that are very talented in bringing people together through the arts. But what was missing was really a way for people to come together across difference, where their various kinds of identity can come together. So I have one friend who says, as a trans person, there's a place for them to go. And as an Indigenous person, there's a place for them to go. As a person who struggles with mental health, there's a place for them to go. There isn't a place for them to go where all those aspects can come together. And they say that Sharing the Sacred and this various sand and water projects are an opportunity to do that. So going back, so we had an arts company, and then what wasn't working was the whole funding structure. What wasn't working was the increasing number of sort of reporting expectations from funders. That wasn't working. What was working was a continuous stream of people through the door, multi-generational, culturally diverse, of experience in every conceivable way, who wanted to share. And what we really realized is that we have found a way of connecting people through using three tools: meditation, which is often working with the head; story sharing, often working with the heart; and then in some way working with our hands, creating art that isn't necessarily beautiful, but that engage the hand and the heart and the head in a particular way. Using those three tools together is a way of bringing people together to share in a way that normally they wouldn't. So that is something that we called Sand and Water. And the reason we call it Sand and Water is at the very beginning of my experience, going way back about 15 years ago, I started in a church in the basement of Parkdale. Funny enough, where I'm now working, but that's a long story. Working in the basement of a church, I decided that I wanted to meditate with a group of seniors who I was working with, street involved folks who don't get a lot of quiet in their life. So I called them together. We said we would sit down. I was really concerned. I didn't know what was going to happen. As I say, they're not used to a lot of quiet. We sat there. We watched their breath for a few moments. And then suddenly I heard the voice of a woman who at the time I didn't know that well, a woman named Margaret, who said, "Sand and water. Sand and water is what I think of." And of course, that's a really beautiful image that brings together sort of the material and stuff of life with spirit and psyche, and bringing those together, not in a duality, but in a way where, if you can imagine a speck of sand being completely surrounded by water as it comes down in a beach. I thought it was a really beautiful image. And so we began working in that way, meditating, art making, sitting quietly. And at the time, about 15 years ago, it really felt like having an individual organization, a distinct organization, was the best way to raise funds and to get the grants that we need to do the work we wanted to do. And so we proceeded to do that. What we've since learned in those 15 years is that that landscape has really changed, and that it is in fact very difficult for a small business to raise enough funds to the reporting requirements, the administrative requirements, all of those things was taking me away from what I'm really gifted at doing, which is bringing people together and facilitate vulnerable open spaces with people. So I we noticed that this was really working. These groups working with seniors, working with street involved folks. And then I had a friend named Nash who was going back to India. It turns out I was going to India as well. And we decided to try this model in Goa, India. So we showed up at a house that he had in a village just outside of the main city of Panjim. And for a 3-week period, we had people coming in 3 o'clock every afternoon. We shared stories, made very simple artwork, and we talked together and we sat quietly. And what we found is that there was a desire for connection, and the sense of isolation and disconnection was as strong in the village of India as it is in Toronto, that it is a worldwide problem, and that we used to talk about social isolation among those people who have problems with physical mobility, people who have mental health challenges. What we've since learned is isolation and loneliness is across the board. At universities, among the wealthy, among the poor, and there's a universal solution of coming together meaningfully in gathering in small groups. People want to do that. We've seen that in India, we've seen that in Toronto, we've seen that all over, that people want to come together. They just don't know how. I've been recently thinking back to my days in medieval studies, and I learned that back when cultures were breaking down, back then the medieval period, groups were meeting each other for the first time, not to trade, not for war, but really to get to know each other. They didn't know how to do that, and diplomacy was born, a set of practices of how to meet each other, to acknowledge peace and greeting, and so we can learn from each other. If we go to a Cordoba, Spain today, we can see Christian churches with Arabic, Italic writing all along the church, because that is an example of that desire to come together. And what we're learning is that today, the challenge isn't groups coming together, but individuals. How do we meet in such a way that acknowledges the incredible complexity of people's identity, the world that they carry with them? Again, people want to do that, they just don't have the tools. So sharing the sacred has been an exciting exploration in doing that. And in doing that, person after person have said to me, I don't have a space like this anywhere in my life. So came back from India, and I was invited to organize a set of workshops. Fine enough, organizing, looking at meditation in different religious traditions. Great idea. But in that, we noticed that it was very male. It was very sort of Eastern. And I was working with a young woman named Yasmin Hassan, who was Eritrean, who sort of said, I don't recognize myself in these traditions. And so I gave her a copy of the book, Joy Unspeakable, by, her name's going to come to me. But it talks about the Black church tradition and contemplation being about movement and survival rather than sitting on a mat. Yasmin came back all excited, and we talked about what if we came together not to share answers, i.e., how this is how you meditate, but how about sharing questions? These are the questions that I come up against again and again, and she said to me, in her life, with a Muslim father, Christian mother, growing up in Canada, feeling very connected to Eritrea, but had never been there before. And so that has given her a real view of identity, that she wanted to share some questions. Out of those questions, she asked one question to the people in the group. And at that time, we could still meet in person. We met in different backyards in Parkdale. And we started with the meditation. In that particular case, people roasted coffee that we could taste from Eritrea. And we shared those stories, those questions really. And we did over 3 months, or we did a series of 4 or 5 workshops. That was so successful, we applied to the United Church, the Edge Grant, and with the Anglican Church for further funding for that. And we got some seed money to that over the year. And then over the year, we had 10 sessions, and more than 76 people attend the 10 sessions, ranging with 8 people to 15 people per, no, 25 people per time.
Right.
And we're
So
running out of time.
what I'm hearing happened is that like you basically had all this, like you were really listening, right? You were seeing like what's happening around you. What have you learned over 15 years? And it came, and what I really love about when you leaned into this is that it was actually from something that was a mistake,
Yes,
right? Like like she came to you and said, I don't feel safer here, or
yeah,
that this is an open space for me.
that's right.
And then what I also really love is that you really listened to her and what she needed, and you really responded to that.
Yeah,
And that became its whole new thing. So
that's
that's
it.
kind of like an unexpected like direction. Were there other unexpected things that happened through this journey for you?
Certainly was. There was a little thing called the coronavirus. I think you might have heard of it. Um, I was just talking to a friend. The guide from our second one of the season was March 10th, 2020, and we realized that it was March 12th, in my case, that everything shut down. So we were 2 days ahead of everything shutting down. And then so we went online, and you might recall we were thinking we were going to wait it out and see what happened. There was a couple of months there. We did say in the original grant that we were going to do 12 sessions. We didn't do those because within those 2 or 3 months, we were just sort of waiting to see for things to come back to normal. When we realized that things weren't going to go back to normal, and in fact, we could go online, that we learned that our process translated, in fact, very well online. There's some of the things in terms of inclusion, we learned that in some ways, being online really helped. What we've heard from people is people dealing with anxiety and various issues, getting from their house, wherever they live, getting on the streetcar, making all the way into Parkdale, which again isn't the quietest of places, getting into the community center, getting upstairs. They were often quiet by the time, or exhausted by the time they got there. And we've been hearing from people is meeting in their living room with their dog or their cat, where they're comfortable, where they feel safe, where they can turn off the camera if they want for a break, actually made it really, really much better for them. Um, it's true of seniors who were really fearing, a few seniors who've been going back to the Caribbean every year for 15 years, couldn't do it this year. They really feared the winter, slipping and falling. And because they could meet online, they could have a real sense of connection without leaving their homes. Another benefit is that we had speakers from around the world. So we had an Indigenous teacher who we built a relationship with from Vancouver. She was able to come in and connect with us, without the airfare. And that was a really memorable session. We did a session with a woman who had come to Canada from India 6 months earlier. So this was a half India, half Canadian group who shared our experience that way. Normally, that would be a much more expensive venture. So one of the mistakes is going online. And one of the things that I've heard from young people, from seniors, is please don't take this away. It's going to be nice when we're able to meet in person again, to give each other a hug, but there's a place for meeting online in my living room where I feel safe in a way that I haven't felt safe in a long time. So that was one very important piece of learning I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, and it seems like when you talk about like it being safer, it does make more room for the curious, right? And exploring this. And so that seems really important in this work as well. How about, so there's obviously a lot of spiritual journeys that and deep introspective learning that people have had, even in bringing together the head, the heart, and the hands, right? But I wonder for yourself in your own spiritual journey through this, is there some, is what kind of growth has impacted you throughout this time, or biggest learning?
It's funny how our most important lessons we keep learning again and again and again. So my learning from Margaret way back 15 years ago was that those folks didn't need to be taught meditation. They didn't really need my art making instruction. A few tricks and tips might help, but they didn't really need the art making instruction. And they certainly didn't need my help in sharing a story. They could do that just fine. What they needed was the space to allow that to happen. Jump ahead 15 years in this experience with sharing the sacred, those lessons are as true now as they were before, but I've learned I'm very good at that. That I feel like my calling, my gift is to create this kind of space that people can move into. And as one person said to me last week, we're learning it's a thing, right? Like gathering, the art of gathering is a thing. It's not a goal towards something else. In fact, that was a part of the problem with the art making, is that we were selling ourselves as professional artists and creating ceremonies and creating celebrations and community development and all of those things. And through this experience, I've learned that my calling, God's movement in my life, is to create that space. And when that space is created, people take it where they need to, towards community development, towards more art making, more like there's the opportunities are endless.
Yeah,
Like
that's it's such a great reminder, Michael. Thank you for that learning of like it's about the relationships. Like, and I think sometimes like in any community of faith, in any nonprofit or charity, like we think, okay, it's the mission, it's the mission, it's the mission. But if the people, if our relationships aren't at the center of it, like doesn't matter.
that's right. That's right.
So
And one,
what,
yeah,
yes. So
and
I'm
one,
wondering what's next, Michael? That's the last question I got for you.
okay, well, what's next? The way that we applied for the grant, we added, there was three pieces to the grant. One was the gatherings. One was a way to make connections between the gatherings. And the third one is the capacity building and learning and leadership development of the guides so that they can do more of their own work wherever they're taken in their own organizations, formally, informally, paid or unpaid, but also so that I can get some help, so that there are people who can do other similar groups, um, either supporting me in that group or taking it off in its own direction. So those were three things that we identified. And then over the last year, we've seen that those are very good goals. We've reached those goals, but now the next step is to expand those. So how can we have gatherings that are even more diverse? By diverse, it doesn't mean having one person in that group. What we find is 3 or 4 people of a group really makes it much easier for people to share. So how do we expand them in such a way so it's not like one person of color or but 4 people from India who share a certain city and who all come from Mumbai and know each other, and then building those. So one is more diverse gatherings. Second one is what I call outreach and inreach. To be honest, we haven't done a lot of outreach because people found each other and they've come to us. So outreach hasn't been as important as what I call inreach, which is making inroads and connections between relationships already developed. So I get a phone call from someone that fills me in with a member of the group that they just saw and said, hey, I just want us to be in touch with each other. So people in the group taking it upon themselves to find connections. It might be a photo on WhatsApp, it might be a phone call, but develop those through newsletters, through various informal means. The third one is the capacity building. We had two very effective leadership development um, opportunities over this time, and we've seen that that is a real need, and we'd like to develop those. So those are our three directions moving forward.
Sounds super exciting, Michael, and thanks for sharing your journey so far.